Hiring managers over Reddit. What's the most strange or cringe-worthy thing a potential candidate has said or done during the interview? He had fighting skills listed. We moved boxes. Dude was bigger than Gregor Clegane and offered his services anytime even if we didn't hire him. I would keep that guy on retainer. When you need a guy who wants to fight people, you probably aren't going to have the time to find one. We had a girl come in for an interview who brought her boyfriend. He didn't wait in the car. He actually wanted to sit in on the interview with her. When I explained that it wasn't protocol and he'd have to at least wait in the break room, he actually got angry at me. She wasn't a bad candidate, but I didn't want to risk anything to do with her boyfriend bleeding into our office. That was actually her pimp. Me. Tell me about your strengths and areas for improvement. Her. Pretty good. Me. And your areas for improvement? Her. Not really. I know a girl who answers questions like this. I kinda want to run her over sometimes. Not during the interview, but I had a candidate send me a thank you note from an email address that started skanking 420. This was for a finance position. This is brilliant. I just imagine the blood leaving his face as he realized he wasn't logged on the right account. Or he was just clueless. She vomited on the desk, then tried to continue the interview like nothing had happened. I'm not the hiring manager. Wasn't even there when it happened. My first management job in IT. It was around 2001 or so. Hiring a general Windows Solaris sysadmin. One guy comes in with a HUUUGE backpack. Do the interview. He's clearly on the spectrum, but I like him okay. Pretty smart. Functional. As he's leaving, I casually ask, "What's in your bag?" He then explained that it's mostly O'Reilly books that he brings to all his interviews so he can prove people wrong if he needs to. Honestly, guy sounds like a perfect size admin. After a pretty terrible interview for a level 1 help desk role. Me. Is there anything you want to ask us? Or anything else you wish to say? Them. Well, I know the director. He said he'd look after me. Leans back and folds arms. He didn't get the job, and we advised the director of his comments. The guy showed up to his interview wearing pigtails, chunky club kid shoes, a kilt, striped tights, and a shirt that said frick on it in big block letters. I passed him on to my boss to interview. "Son, I got an interview for you. Frick off, Dad." A girl stopped me mid-question. She even put her hand up to ask my starsin, then the starsin of my significant other. Then she asked me to describe our relationship. Guy admitted to criminal record of methamphetamine possession on application. Showed up tweaking so hard he couldn't sit still. Needless to say, it was a very short interview. When asked about experience with source control software, the guy we interviewed said, "I've actually written a song about it," and before we could stop him he started singing it. Asked a candidate about previous job experience, working for a company that made and sold prosthetic limbs. "Oh, I was so passionate about it. I just loved it so much that I wanted to run out in the street and cut people's arms and legs off just so they could experience our product." Serif Industries employee, most likely. I introduced myself to the candidate. "Hello, I am John Smith." She responded, "No, you're not. You're Tom Brown." I spent the next few minutes trying to convince her I was John Smith. I finally took my driver's license out and proved who I was. Did not hire. Not a hiring manager, but at a place I worked at, they were passing around an application of a guy who had to state that he had been convicted of a felony. He explained that a drunk driver killed his son, so he murdered the guy, was out on parole. I felt bad. When asked about strengths and weaknesses, the candidate replied, "I crave KFC and often get myself a bargain bucket." I just didn't know what to say next, let alone whether they considered it a strength or a weakness. A candidate where I worked, when talking about how he performs in a team, told a story of a guy they call Dirty Johnny, because he was Mexican. The most common reason I vote no for a candidate is the "tell me a story where you worked on a team" question. So many people, despite knowing full well they're at an interview, proceed to either throw their co-worker's boss under the bus or to be blatantly gender-based xenophobic. Before I had even asked the guy to sit down, he said, "Yes, this seems like a nice place to work. When do I start?" I like confidence in a potential employee, but there's no need to be cocky. Me. Can you tell me about the gap in 2010 to 2012? Them. I took time out to work on myself. Me. Okay, so can you tell me why you left your last position? Them. I was asked to leave, and I have to disclose this. I embezzled from them. Me. So, did you work on yourself in prison between 2010 to 2012? Them. I don't think that's important. Now I Google people every single time before I interview them. He said he was going out back to smoke a bowl after we were done and asked if I'd like to join him. I personally don't smoke and have no problem with people who do, but until it's legalized in our state, keep that crap to yourself during job interviews. Even if it is legalized, it still lacks professionalism, in a similar way to inviting your interviewer to have a beer with you. I only witnessed this because I'm not a hiring manager, but this dude tried to take his mom in an interview with him. Obviously the guy said, I would like to interview the applicant one-on-one please, and this bee threw a fit and stormed out with her son. Helicopter parents are the worst. Explaining why he left his last job, because I had to get up at the butt crack of dawn. I agree with him. Totally valid reason. Probably could have worded it better. I thought it was hilarious. Personally, didn't get hired because there were other people more qualified. I can see that as a potential reason for leaving, but maybe not worded like that. I interview at least 5 potential caregivers a week to work with seniors that have dementia. We don't ask the typical job interview questions. We ask them a series of common scenarios they will encounter and see how they respond. One of the questions is, what would you do if you walk into a client's room and they start screaming at you to get out? The correct answer is some variation of leave for a few minutes and come back with a big smile on your face, and usually they will be happy to see you. One caregiver said she would bear hug the client into submission because she doesn't tolerate any disrespect. When I tried telling her that's the opposite of what you should do, she replied, no, I would stick with the bear hug. I would drop a people's elbow on that jabroni until she smelled what the rock was cooking. I was on an interview committee for an IT position, and I had shaggy, longish hair at the time. This kid comes in, has a pretty terrible interview, but he's confident the whole time. When we asked him if he had any questions or comments, he looked at me and said, I came in and saw your hair, and I can't believe they actually hire people like you. He was probably nervous, and I think his intention was to say that he's glad we don't just hire the typical professional looking type. Unfortunately for him, it did not come off that way. At my previous job, I was interviewing candidates for a position within my team. One of the applicants was internal, so I knew of her and knew she had a few cats as pets. So the day of the interview arrives, in she comes and we start with the basics. I then ask a few competency-based questions and she starts to give answers not based on her work experience. She had trained overseas teams and had an impressive CV, but relating the answers back to her cats. For example, I asked, can you give me an example of your leadership skills? I crap you not. Her answer was along the lines of, well, I have 2 cats and around feeding time I need to make sure cat 1 gets fed first as cat 2 has a weight problem and will try to eat cat 1's food. I need to ensure I lead by making sure cat 2 is kept well away from cat 1 until he's finished his food. She then showed me pictures of the cats in question. Don't get me wrong, they were some mighty fine beasts. Cat 2 was a fat old frick, and I have a pet cat, but I was a bit surprised. I did get some decent answers from her on occasion, but it was a very surreal interview. She didn't get the job. TLDR. Cats. A few years ago we put out an app for a senior software developer. The description was rather broad. We had a variety of projects we could stick them on, but needed a senior level person that could jump in relatively quickly. In comes this lady, let's name her Susan, with an excellent resume. 10 years of development experience, lead level previous position, listed proficiencies in all the languages we wanted, even obscure ones. Who the heck still knows XSLT, for example? So we bring her for an interview, one of those public sector committee ones with preset questions, and she's acing it. Talks a big game, excitedly describes her past projects and their impact, seems all around pretty personable. Then we deviate a bit and start asking basic coding questions and she replies with a line I will never forget as long as I shall live. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't really do coding. I have my Chinaman for that. 5 seconds of stunned silence. I beg your pardon. My Chinaman. Let's call him Bob. If something needs doing, I pass it off to him and it's just done. He's really good. When we inquired if we could maybe interview the Chinaman instead, she got really flustered and basically wound the interview down. It's like we committed a great offense by implying the two of them were separate entities. To this day we don't really know what the deal there was. Exactly. TLDR. Our applicant had a Chinaman personal coding slave or something. Maybe she was outsourcing her work through a site like Ardisk. I was once really nervous at the end of my job interview and for some reason decided to stroke one of the office plants as the hiring manager walked me to the exit. Then I laughed awkwardly and said in a surprised tone they're real. He was not impressed and I did not get the job. We had a manager who did phone interviews. She calls one candidate who answers oh thank God, an Australian. I'm so sick of speaking to Asians. This manager was Asian : Question was how do you install a CD-ROM drive into a PC? Answer was you press the button, put the CD in, and follow the instructions on the screen. I was sitting in on that interview and my boss at the time hired her. We're still friends and I still give him crap for it. LMAO. I've had some ridiculous interviews. One older white woman said, will I have to work with Middle Easterners? And she pointed to a guy outside the meeting room. The guy was of Indian heritage, but was born here. I said, Mike's not from the Middle East. Her in a whisper, you know what I mean. Brown people. I work for a tech company. Another guy seems nice during introductions and then I ask my first question. That's your first question? You're not going to ask about the break in my experience me. Number. I care about whether you can do this job, not what you've done the past year. Him. But why wouldn't you ask that first? Me. Because I want to know about the work you did at this other company. Him. Well, I wrote a novel you know, and it got published. Did you Google me and know that already? Me. I Googled you. Didn't see anything about a novel. And that isn't pertinent here. Can you address the question? Him. The movie rights were optioned. I've just finished my second novel. I'm looking for a publisher. Want to know what it's about? Me. Not right now. Maybe lag. Him. It's this great story. Me. I'm sorry. You're going to have to leave. If you can't tell me about your practical experience, you're not suited for this role. Received a resume titled I'll resume doc. It wasn't us enough. Spelling errors, punctuation problems, and not one reference to us. Poor Mr. Sanel. Eliminated because of one capitalization error. From the other side of the table, I was interviewing for a tech writing position at an engineering company. The first part of the interview with the communications manager went really well and she brought me in to speak to the head of engineering. He asked me lots of questions about organizing documentation and where what sections would go and why. At one point he starts asking about cars. He then wanted me to write a list of all the different parts of a car and, after completion of my list, separate them into sections. Something like safety, use, maintenance, etc. So I start listing parts and he keeps telling me to keep adding to it. Eventually I've filled the whole page and he keeps telling me to continue. I maybe know slightly more about cars than the average 20-something woman, but I'm by no means a car aficionado. This job has nothing to do with cars. I am confused. I have no idea what this list is missing. Eventually, I tell him so. He looks me dead in the eyes and explains that I forgot to list wheels. My very extensive list of car parts has no wheels. Certain that I've bombed the interview for this very obvious and stupid oversight anyway, I replied it's a hovercraft. I got the job. TLDR. Sometimes being a sassy idiot gets you hired. Boss later told me that she liked me the whole interview but the hovercraft comment was what cemented her decision to hire me. Just your standard hovercraft with disc brakes and strut suspension. Smoking hot woman applying for project manager job. Spotty job history. Seemed qualified and interviewed well. Had a criminal charge on her background check. I have to ask her for permission to see the details. We use a third-party agency. She agreed. Public disorderly conduct. Basically was semi-naked and drunk on public property in last year of college. I chose to ignore it. Hire her. She doesn't even end up reporting to me. A year later, she comes to thank me. Said I was the first person to not try to use her minor charge as leverage for freaking as her boss. And I was also discreet and never passed on the info post interview. This was her 5th job in 3 years. I felt bad for her. Thankfully it's all been successful ever since. You've made a big change in her life. That's what it's all about. I was doing interviews and got to the standard "What is your weakness?" question. The guy's response was personal hygiene. I actually did this cause I was nervous. Is this a picture of your wife? She is beautiful. That is my 14-year-old daughter. Nice. Nice. I interviewed a 30-year-old guy who had gotten all his previous jobs through connections. It was his first job interview ever. Although he turned out to be the sweetest, nicest, gentlest person you could imagine, he looked like an axe-murdering serial debaucher, kidnapper, diddler, fiend, motorcycle gang member, psychopath. The dude was genuinely scary looking. He was super quiet, super shy, and was so nervous about this interview that he was sweating like crazy. Overall, he wasn't making a good impression. He said in the interview, "I know I look scary, and I'm really shy, so people think I'm a psycho, but it's not like some freaking criminal. I'm just a nice guy." He then realized that he said the F word while admitting that people were scared of him. He then said, "I imagine this isn't going very well." I ended up hiring him, and he was the best worker and one of the nicest people I've ever known in my life. I was interviewing a girl to work as a pharmacy technician, and during the interview she told me she sells her Adderall to her friends. I face-palmed, because I had a male come in for a pharmacy technician and told us casually he was going to bring spare stock bottles with some extra pills home and research them. On top of everything else, I was in charge of inventory. I asked a candidate if he was bilingual. He got shocked and uncomfortable before very awkwardly trying to flirt. When I explained what bilingual meant, he replied with, "No, I only speak American." Well, I guess he gave you his answer. Alright, it wasn't during an interview, but a kid looking to get hired at my store came in and asked to speak to me. I was out the day he came in, so he asked my co-workers the next day I would be there and planned to come back. Well, 2 days later when I was back, he came back with his grandmother. Now this didn't bother me at first because we have hired some kids who were too young to drive but had a good head on their shoulders. What did bother me is when the kid stood by the door and the grandmother came to talk to me, alone. She started having the interview for him when I didn't even plan on giving the kid an interview yet. She handed me a resume that I'm fairly sure she designed in Paint and started spouting off all these really admirable traits about this kid. Meanwhile, he stood by the door and looked straight down at his shoes. She told me what a hard worker he was, how quick of a learner he was, and because this was a retail job she tried to tell me how personable he was. I crap you not. This lady looked me dead in the eyes with her grandson standing 50 feet away and tried to tell me he was great with people and that he had no problems approaching anyone. I was stunned. I kindly told her that I would keep his resume on file, but at the moment we were not looking for any new employees. So she thanks me and shakes my hand and walks over to her grandson. She whispers something in his ear and he walks over to me. He doesn't say a word and just sticks his hand out at me. I went to shake his hand, but I'm not entirely sure he understood the concept of a handshake. I was grabbing his hand and shaking while he just let his limp, clammy hand sit in my grasp until it was over. He then turned around and left. Dude, you should have just said, "Hey man, come over, let me talk to you." He was humiliated. Probably not at his fault. "Nah bro, stopped using C like 2 weeks ago," was the response to my question about familiarity with agile processes. Candidate, when I was at the University of Ohio. Me, your resume says you went to the University of Tennessee? Candidate, wait, which resume do you have? While interviewing a prospective new designer, we noticed he'd totally plagiarized a design that was known to us. After he repeatedly denied it, I just got up and left. I am a hiring manager. The best I've ever come across is, "So, I can see you have a 16-year gap in your employment history. What did you do during that time?" "Mainly just walked my dog. Vacant stares all around." Say what you will, but this man probably didn't have a patchy lawn full of poop. I interviewed a leprechaun once. He was a short, somewhat overweight guy that was of Irish descent, had red hair and a beard. He chose to wear of all things a green suit to the interview. It was hard to keep a straight face, especially when my interviewing partner mentioned a rainbow table, cryptography, and said our code was gold standard and lamented the construction going on at the Cloverleaf exit near the office. Your interviewing partner is the best kind of terrible person. Every workplace needs someone like him. P. My favorite was when I had to interview this total bro. So many cringe-worthy interview mess-ups I had to hold myself in from laughing. When asked about dealing with difficult customers, he mentions how he hated dealing with crappy brown people with long but last names. I had one recently where the person came in with a tank top and board shorts, then started the interview by saying, "Sorry, I was just on a trip in Bermuda, puts thumbs in tank top straps, that's probably why I am so tan. We did not hire this gentleman." Not a hiring manager, but I had used the term lot lizard to describe a job I held at a Harley Davidson after high school. It was on my resume for a few years. It took a girlfriend to inform me that a lot lizard is a highway rest stop prostitute that mainly services truckers. When I worked in a grocery co-op, I had some interesting interviews. One really sticks out in my mind. Me: "Why do you want to work with our company?" Him: "Because you guys don't drug test." Me: "We do random drug testing. What makes you think that we don't?" Him: "This is a co-op. You guys sell weed. Why would you drug test? That's hypocritical." That's how we found out that the receiver on the loading dock was selling drugs out the side door. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.